December 3rd, 2003. Baltimore, Maryland. While working on a plea agreement, 38-year-old prosecutor Jonathan Luna leaves his office at the federal courthouse shortly before midnight. The following morning, Luna's vehicle is discovered over 90 miles away in a creek in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and his body is lying in the water. He has been stabbed 36 times with his own penknife, but surprisingly, the FBI leaned toward his death being a suicide. However, a check of Luna's movements that night showed that he made an unexplained detour through Delaware before he wound up in Lancaster County, and the local coroner's office continues to insist that he was murdered. After that, the trail went cold. Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of The Trail Went Cold. I'm your host Robin Warder, and today we're going to be covering one of the more baffling cases I've ever featured on this podcast, the unexplained 2005 death of Jonathan Luna. This is the story of a federal prosecutor who drove away from his office late one night and was found dead the following morning in an entirely different state under very bizarre circumstances. Some of the strangest mysteries I've ever encountered are those in which the victim makes a lengthy, unexplained trip to a location they have no reason to be at before they wind up dead. As examples, I've previously done episodes on the mysterious deaths of Judy Smith, who vanished during a business trip to Philadelphia before her remains were found on a North Carolina mountain months later, and Blair Adams, who made a cross-country trip from British Columbia to Knoxville, Tennessee, before he was killed by an unknown assailant. The death of Jonathan Luna is particularly odd, not only because he inexplicably traveled from Baltimore to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, but because he also drove hundreds of miles out of his way in the opposite direction to travel through Delaware, and no one has any idea why. Not only that, but there has been a dispute between different law enforcement agencies about whether Luna's death was murder or suicide, even though stabbing yourself 36 times with your own penknife seems like a very unlikely way to kill yourself. So on this episode, we're going to pick this case apart and try and see if we can come up with a logical explanation for what happened. However, before we get started, just a quick reminder that The Trail Went Cold is a weekly podcast which is currently available for download on several platforms, including iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play Music. So if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it, and please leave us a rating or review on any of those sites to help spread the word and garner us more exposure. The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so if you would like to learn how to support the show, please visit our page at patreon.com/thetrailwentcold. For as little as $1 a month, you can garner access to exclusive rewards, which may include stickers and thank you cards from yours truly, early access to episodes, and bonus content. So with all that out of the way, let us now explore the bizarre death of Jonathan Luna. Our story begins in Baltimore, Maryland in 2003. Our central figure is 38-year-old Jonathan Luna, who works as an assistant United States attorney. Originally born in the projects of the South Bronx to a Filipino father and an African-American mother, Luna worked at different law practices in different cities before accepting his current position with the United States Attorney's Office and moving to Baltimore in 1999. For the past 12 years, he has been married to his wife Angela, an obstetrician, and the couple have 2 sons. During his 4-year tenure with the U.S. Attorney's Office, Luna has prosecuted over 80 cases, many of them involving drugs. On the evening of December 3rd, Luna was working on a case in his office at the Federal District Court building. Earlier that day, he had appeared in district court to prosecute a drug conspiracy trial involving 2 defendants, Dion Smith and Walter Poindexter. They were both being charged with selling heroin out of the studio of their startup rap music label, which, appropriately enough, was named Stash House Records. Even though it couldn't be brought up at this particular trial, Poindexter was also potentially facing murder charges for shooting a man named Alvin Jones who had stolen drugs from him. Luna spent the day negotiating a plea agreement with Smith and Poindexter's defense attorneys, and after it was finalized, the agreement would be presented in front of a judge in court at 9:30 a.m. the following morning. At around 11 p.m., Luna was working on the plea deal at his home when he received a call on his cell phone and told his wife he had to return to his office. He subsequently went back there, and at 11:38, Luna's Honda Accord was clocked leaving the courthouse's parking garage. And what happened to Luna over the course of the next 6 hours is one hell of a baffling mystery which has never been explained. At around 5:30 a.m. the following morning, employees were showing up for work at the Sensenig and Weaver Well Drilling Company in the Denver borough of Brecknock Township in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. In the distance, they noticed what appeared to be a red glow from a vehicle's dashboard indicator on a dark, remote 2-lane road located near their building. When the employees went for a closer look, they discovered Jonathan Luna's Honda Accord next to a shallow creek. The vehicle's front end was in the water, the engine was idling, and its headlights were turned off. Luna's body was lying face down in the creek underneath his car's engine. He was covered in blood, and it would turn out that he had been stabbed a total of 36 times all over his neck, back, and chest. His left carotid artery had been severed, and he also had a head wound. Since he had water in his lungs, the Lancaster County coroner would determine that Luna was still alive when he fell into the creek, and that the actual cause of death was drowning. There was blood smeared on the Accord's driver's seat, the driver's side door, and the fender, and a pool of blood was discovered on the rear passenger side floor, which seemed to indicate that Luna had been bleeding in the back seat before his body wound up in the water. In addition, $200 was found scattered throughout the vehicle. At first, investigators could find no trace of a murder weapon, but 6 weeks later, Luna's penknife was discovered next to a rock in the creek, and it was determined that it had been used to inflict all of his stab wounds. However, no one could figure out why Luna left Baltimore to begin with, and what made him travel to Lancaster County, which was around 90 miles away. Adding to the mystery was the fact that Luna's cell phone and glasses were left behind in his office at the courthouse, even though he needed his glasses for driving. The plea agreement Luna had been working on was also not completed when he left, even though it needed to be presented in court the following morning. At around 9:30 p.m., Luna had left a voicemail for one of the defense attorneys to say that the agreement would be faxed to him later that evening, but this never occurred. When investigators looked into Luna's movements after he left Baltimore, it only raised more perplexing questions. When Luna drove away from the courthouse, he headed northeast on Interstate 95, and the 90-mile drive from Baltimore to Lancaster County should have taken around 2 hours, but for reasons unknown, Luna decided to keep going east and took a major detour. Luna had an Easy Pass transponder, which could be used to electronically pay the fare at toll interchanges. The Easy Pass was used to pay the fare at the first 3 toll interchanges he drove through, but after that, he inexplicably decided to start using paper toll tickets instead. At 12:57 a.m., Luna stopped at an ATM at the JFK Plaza Service Center near Newark, Delaware, and withdrew $200, which was presumably the same $200 found scattered throughout his car later that morning. Even though there were security cameras at the location, they apparently did not record the transaction properly, so no one can be certain if Luna himself made the withdrawal. The next record of Luna occurred at 2:37 a.m., when toll records showed him entering the New Jersey Turnpike at Interchange 6A from New Jersey Route 130. Now, this is one of the more troubling discrepancies in this case, because traveling to this location from Newark, Delaware should have only taken around 45 minutes, so this left nearly 1 hour of time in which Luna's whereabouts are not accounted for. At 2:47 a.m., Luna crossed over the Delaware River toll bridge and entered the Pennsylvania Turnpike at Interchange 359 and subsequently headed west. 33 minutes later, he stopped at a Sunoco station at the King of Prussia Service Plaza to purchase gas. Once again, there were security cameras there, but they did not capture the transaction, and Luna could not be seen on the grainy surveillance footage. However, an employee did remember seeing Luna at that time while he purchased a soda and a bottled water and thought he looked calm and did not believe he was under any duress. But curiously, Luna did purchase 2 tanks of gas on his credit card, though it's unclear if he was traveling with anyone or being accompanied by a second car. At 4:04 a.m., Luna exited the Pennsylvania Turnpike and turned in a paper toll ticket at the Reading-Lancaster interchange. However, here's the most interesting clue. This particular ticket happened to have a spot of blood on it. So even though Luna's body would not be discovered in Lancaster County for another hour and a half, this seemed to suggest that he was already injured at this time. If that wasn't enough, it's also been reported that Luna's credit card was used at a shopping mall in King of Prussia at 9:30 a.m., 4 hours after he was found dead. While this might be an indication that it was stolen from him when he was killed, Luna did use his credit card at a gas station in King of Prussia, so the alternate explanation is that he could have lost the card there before someone found it and decided to use it. Well, the FBI became involved in the investigation, and 1 year after Luna's death, the Baltimore FBI office would release a surprising statement. They concluded that Luna was alone during the entire time period between when he left the federal district court building until he was found dead. So believe it or not, they were inclined to think that Luna's death might have been a suicide. At the time these events took place, Luna seemed to be suffering from some major personal problems. The Washington Post and Baltimore Sun would both publish articles about the case, which stated that according to quote-unquote unnamed law enforcement sources, Luna had $25,000 in credit card debt on cards that his wife didn't even know about. Now, even though the $25,000 credit card debt is a claim you'll see mentioned in virtually all the sources about this case, it might not be entirely accurate. In 2008, the Washington Examiner published an article which stated that a probate court filing on Luna's estate listed his debts as a $9,034 balance on his American Express, an $8,500 balance on his NB&A credit card, and a $7,000 loan from Sally Mae, which was in good standing when he died. So while he did have nearly $25,000 in debt when he died, only about $17,500 of it was from credit cards. Sources also stated that internet postings had been found by someone using the name Jonathan Luna, who was advertising for female sex partners. But the biggest issues Luna appeared to be facing were at his job. The previous year, Luna had co-prosecuted a case in which a professional bank robber named Naco Brown was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison. After the trial, one of the key pieces of evidence against Brown, a bag containing cash found in his accomplice's safe, mysteriously went missing. Even though most of the sources you'll find claim that this bag contained $36,000 in cash, it sounds like the correct number is over $38,000. It seems like the reported number may have been changed to $36,000 in an attempt to draw a correlation to the fact that Luna was stabbed 36 times. Anyway, during Brown's trial, the bags of money were wheeled into the courtroom to be displayed as evidence, and it was the responsibility of Luna and the FBI agent in charge of the case to ensure the money made it back to the courthouse evidence vault at the end of the day, though no one can be certain about the exact time it went missing. What's significant is that the one particular bag which disappeared only contained money which could not be traced back to a specific bank. This essentially meant that the cash was untraceable, and to this day, it has never been recovered. Anyway, at the time of his death, Luna was slated to undergo a polygraph test in regards to the missing money. In fact, he had already been scheduled to take the polygraph a couple times, but whenever the date arrived, Luna would call to reschedule it. One source has also claimed that before Naco Brown's trial, Luna had filled out an online loan application for $30,000, which he wound up canceling shortly after the $38,000 went missing. Another major issue Luna was facing at the U.S. Attorney's Office was his relationship with his boss, Thomas DiBaggio, who did not like him too much. Shortly before Luna's death, DiBaggio had reportedly stormed into Luna's office and told him to get ready to, quote-unquote, pack his bags, prompting Luna to hire his own attorney in the event that he got fired from his job. It seemed like Luna was on thin ice at the time his drug conspiracy trial against Dion Smith and Walter Poindexter began, and things were about to get worse. The chief witness against the two defendants was a convicted heroin dealer named Warren Grace, who did damage to the prosecution's case by giving less than credible testimony on the stand. It would also turn out that Grace was working as a paid informant for the FBI, and he had a history of breaking the conditions of the confidential informant program by doing such things as slipping out of his electronic monitoring device. At one point, after leaving his halfway house without permission, Grace was recaptured while carrying a large quantity of heroin in his SUV. It was alleged that the FBI agent in charge, Stephen Skinner, essentially let Grace get away with all these violations as long as he kept supplying them with information. While all these revelations about Grace came out during the trial, and the defense attorneys accused the prosecution of not disclosing potentially exculpatory evidence, on December 3rd, the federal district judge scolded Luna and Agent Skinner for their handling of the situation in open court, and ruled that the defense would be allowed to address Grace's conduct and the FBI's confidential informant program during the trial. Well, Luna now realized that his best chance of saving face and averting a potential disaster was to offer a plea deal to Smith and Poindexter. This would prove to be a sticky situation because even though he was not on trial for the crime, Poindexter wanted the plea agreement to also cover his alleged murder of Alvin Jones and not just his drug trafficking charges. Luna would spend the rest of the day crafting the plea agreement and had not yet finished the terms of Poindexter's plea deal before he went missing. On the morning of December 4th, another attorney from Luna's office finished the plea agreement in his absence and presented it in court. The terms of the agreement were that the conspiracy and murder charges would be dropped. Smith pled guilty to one count of heroin distribution and possessing a firearm during a drug transaction and would end up getting 110 months, while Poindexter pled guilty to 3 counts of heroin distribution and received 168 months. Had they been convicted at trial, Smith probably would have wound up getting 27 years, while Poindexter received 60. Needless to say, Thomas DiBaggio would not have been thrilled that Luna was forced to put together this plea deal, and given the contentious relationship between them, this could have potentially been the last straw which cost Luna his job. For this reason, the FBI wondered if Luna had finally reached his breaking point, prompting him to abandon his work on the plea agreement and commit suicide. They also claimed that Luna did not have the defensive wounds one would expect to find on a victim's hands if someone was stabbing him 36 times. Many of his stab wounds were superficial and had barely penetrated the skin, which seemed to give off the impression that they were hesitation wounds caused by Luna's attempts to stab himself. The FBI also pushed forward an alternate theory, that Luna did not intentionally commit suicide, but was instead making an attempt to stage a phony kidnapping. Due to his recent issues at the drug conspiracy trial, perhaps this was Luna's desperate attempt to garner sympathy from his office and potentially save his job. After traveling to Lancaster County, Luna stabbed himself with his penknife in order to simulate a violent attack, but went too far and accidentally punctured his carotid artery, costing himself his own life. Well, needless to say, many people rejected the FBI's theories, including the Lancaster County Coroner's Office, who performed the initial autopsy on Luna and were convinced that he was a victim of foul play. They disputed the FBI's assertion that Luna had no defensive wounds on his hands, claiming that he had noticeable cuts which were so bad that they had to put gloves on his hands for the viewing of his body at his funeral. In addition, Luna appeared to have fingernail marks on his wrist, and a wound to one of his own fingernails. Some of Luna's wounds, which included significant slashing to his throat and scrotum, were so extreme that it seemed very difficult to believe he could have self-inflicted them. Luna also had stab wounds in the middle of his back beneath his shoulder blades, a spot where it would have been very difficult for him to stab himself. Though I don't believe this has ever officially been verified, it's also been rumored that a second blood type which didn't match Luna, as well as a partial print from an unidentified person, was found at the scene. The FBI allegedly pressured the Lancaster County Coroner's Office into changing their finding about Luna's death from homicide to suicide, but they refused to do so. At one point, the county coroner wrote a letter to the FBI, offering to convene a coroner's inquest in which FBI agents could present open court testimony about why they believed Luna committed suicide, but he received no response. Regardless of how Luna was killed, one thing which nobody could figure out is why he wound up dead on that particular remote road in Lancaster County. Luna's father would claim that in the months prior to his death, his son made several trips to Pennsylvania, one of which prompted Luna to cancel a Thanksgiving weekend trip to New York to see his family. The exact purpose of these trips is unclear. The lawyers who worked on Luna's drug conspiracy case believe that he may have been traveling to Philadelphia to interview the key witness, Warren Grace, who was being detained in a federal prison there at that time. A book was eventually published about the case titled The Midnight Ride of Jonathan Luna, and its author, William Kiesling, has suspected that Luna may have been murdered by an FBI agent. Kiesling has always been troubled by the fact that Luna's plea agreement in the drug conspiracy trial was completed in his absence on the same morning he was found dead. Rather than asking for a postponement until Luna could be located, his office immediately submitted the plea agreement to the judge when court convened at 9:30 a.m. Even though word about the discovery of Luna's body would not reach Baltimore until the late afternoon, very little concern was expressed that morning about the fact that Luna was missing. At the time, there was a congressional investigation going on into the FBI's criminal mishandling of informants, and it's been theorized that it was in everyone's best interest to submit the plea agreement and put an end to the trial as quickly as possible before the judge could order an investigation into how the FBI had mishandled the situation with Warren Grace. William Kiesling also expressed his anger about how the FBI decided to write off Luna's death as a suicide and essentially launched a smear campaign against him by releasing controversial elements of his personal life. In Kiesling's own words, quote, "If a white cop or white prosecutor goes down, you don't accuse them of stealing money," end quote. Ed Martino, a private investigator hired by Luna's friends to look into the case, would claim he found nothing to indicate that Luna was involved in anything illegal, such as stealing the missing $38,000 from the bank robbery case. He was quoted as saying, "They used to call it disinformation. They call it spin today. For the FBI or anyone in the government to trash this man was absolutely irresponsible," end quote. At the moment, the Baltimore FBI office says they have closed the case, but that it could be reopened should new information surface, and they are still offering a $100,000 reward. The case officially remains an open investigation with the Pennsylvania State Police, but this kind of provides a catch-22 for people like William Kiesling, who wanted access to Luna's autopsy report. Pennsylvania law prevents autopsy records from being unsealed for open crimes which are still under investigation, but the problem is that no one seems to be actively investigating the case. In the meantime, the case remains shrouded in mystery, as the exact circumstances of Jonathan Luna's overnight tri-state road trip and his subsequent death remain unknown. So I guess you could say, the trail went cold. Well, I'm just going to say this up front. I am pretty stumped by this one. This is one of those mysteries where it's extremely difficult to come up with an airtight theory, and no matter how hard you try, none of them make 100% complete sense. There have been a number of theories presented. Luna was murdered by the FBI, he was murdered by a scorned lover, he was murdered as revenge for one of the cases he prosecuted in the past, he committed suicide, he accidentally killed himself while trying to stage his own kidnapping. But no matter which theory you believe, none of them offer a satisfactory explanation for what Luna was doing in rural Lancaster County to begin with, or why he decided to leave his place of employment and spend nearly 6 hours driving hundreds of miles on a tri-state road trip before he wound up there. You can almost draw a parallel between this story and the disappearance of Center County District Attorney Ray Griecar, which is one of the most famous missing persons cases of the modern era. Griecar went missing in April of 2005, only 16 months after this. Griecar and Luna were both prosecutors who left their home cities on a road trip before their vehicles were discovered in a remote borough of Pennsylvania, as Griecar's vehicle was found in Lewisburg, which is about 2 hours away from Lancaster County. Unlike Luna, Griecar's body has never been found, But a body of water also plays a role in that story, as Grikar's laptop would be found in a nearby river. I don't see any reason to believe that these two cases are connected, but it is pretty odd that we have two separate unsolved mysteries from rural Pennsylvania during this time period, involving prosecuting attorneys which have quite a few striking similarities. Now, some people believe there was no foul play in the Grikar case, and that he committed suicide by jumping into the Susquehanna River, which is certainly a possibility, but the suicide theory in Luna's case is a lot more controversial. If true, it would involve him taking his own life in the most brutal, painful manner imaginable, and there's a disagreement between different law enforcement agencies about whether he could have done this. So I guess I'll start off by examining the suicide angle, and try to figure out how these events might have played out if that is what actually happened. Luna's friends and family described him as a pleasant, friendly guy who loved his wife and 2 sons, and always had a positive attitude, so they believed there was no chance he would ever commit suicide. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that a person who appears happy on the outside might not be concealing great pain on the inside, as it's not unheard of for people who display no warning signs to shock everyone by suddenly deciding to take their own life. What's interesting here is that Luna's wife, Angela, has remained a very private person who has almost never spoken to the media or commented on her husband's death. It hasn't been alleged that the two of them were experiencing any serious troubles with the marriage at the time he was killed, but if they were, she has never said anything publicly. I know there have been reports that someone posting under the name Jonathan Luna was looking for sex partners over the internet, but if this is true, can they actually be certain that it was the same Jonathan Luna? Maybe it's just me, but if I was a married man and I was soliciting for sex online, I probably wouldn't be posting under my real name. As far as I can tell, no corroborating evidence was ever found to indicate Luna was carrying on any secret affairs. And then there's the alleged $25,000 in credit card debt, which in actuality appears to be just under $18,000 in credit card debt and a $7,000 loan from Sally Mae. Having that much credit card debt isn't ideal, but Luna was an attorney and his wife was an obstetrician, so it sounds like they had a pretty good household income, and these aren't the type of balances which would keep them drowning in debt forever. And contrary to what most of the sources say, the 2008 Washington Examiner article I mentioned stated that Luna's wife didn't know about all the debts he had, so I'm not sure if he was keeping any major secrets from her. There's a lot of controversy about the accuracy of these allegations against Luna, as it seems like they were provided to the media by, quote-unquote, unnamed law enforcement sources. I know that Ed Martino, the private investigator I mentioned earlier, sounds like a bit of a conspiracy theorist when he says that all this stuff published about Luna's personal life was, quote-unquote, disinformation, which was deliberately leaked to cast him in a less than positive light, but he does have a point. While all the stuff about the credit card balances and Luna's online activities has created speculation that he may have been living some sort of double life, it really seems like nothing but smoke to me, and I don't think it should be taken as a strong indicator that Luna would have been compelled to commit suicide. But even if there were no serious issues in Luna's personal life, there were certainly issues in his professional life. After Luna's death, his boss, Thomas DiBaggio, tried to downplay the combative relationship between them and said there wasn't actually any danger of Luna getting fired from his job, though some of his co-workers have disputed this. Luna's drug conspiracy case against Dion Smith and Walter Poindexter had just gone south, and he had pretty much been humiliated in open court once it was revealed that his key witness, Warren Grace, was a very unreliable FBI informant, and that all this unflattering information about Grace wasn't disclosed to the defense team. That's technically a Brady violation, which is one of the most unethical things a prosecutor can do while trying a case, though it's unclear whether or not the whole thing was Luna's fault. The FBI may not have actually told Luna about all the criminal things Grace did while he was in their confidential informant program, and it's possible Luna legitimately did not know about them until after they were revealed at trial. Regardless, it still provided serious damage to Luna's case, and he was now being forced to put together a plea agreement which ensured that these two drug traffickers, one of whom was an alleged murderer, were going to serve less time in prison than they deserved. If DiBaggio really wanted to fire Luna, then this is the exact ammunition he could use in order to do so. But would losing his job be a strong enough motive for Luna to commit suicide? After all, Luna had been telling people that he was thinking about quitting the U.S. Attorney's Office and starting up his own firm, so getting fired probably wouldn't have been the end of the world for him. However, if Luna was actually involved in the theft of the $38,000 in the bank robbery case he prosecuted, and could conceivably be facing prison time, that might have been the end of the world. He was scheduled to take a polygraph test, which he had already blown off several times, and while failing a polygraph doesn't mean you're going to get charged with a crime, Luna may have felt that the walls were closing in on him. I'm honestly on the fence about whether Luna took that money. While he was one of the people who knew it was being stored in the courthouse evidence vault, there were others who had the means and opportunity to steal it, and no one was able to pinpoint when exactly the cash went missing. I guess the strongest piece of circumstantial evidence against Luna is the fact that he canceled a $30,000 loan application shortly after the money disappeared, but I don't see any indication that he spent a large amount of money during that time period either. If Luna did take the money, I'm not sure what he did with it, particularly since he was carrying nearly $25,000 in debt at the time of his death. But supposing that Luna was guilty, and he decided to kill himself rather than face the scandal of being labeled a thief, it does seem odd to me that Luna would feel compelled to do so after spending nearly an entire day working on a plea agreement which he never even finished. The only way I could see the suicide theory making any sense is if Luna reached the point where he just suffered a complete mental breakdown. After being humiliated in court, and attempting to put together a plea agreement which he really didn't want to do, perhaps something in Luna's brain just snapped. He leaves the courthouse in a daze, not even bothering to take his glasses with him, and then spends the entire night driving a winding route through 3 different states. He might not have had an endgame in mind, but for whatever reason, he winds up on a remote road in Lancaster County. It's never really been explained how the front end of Luna's car wound up in that creek, but since it was a very dark road with poor visibility, maybe it crashed there accidentally. This could have been Luna's absolute breaking point, and he's now in such a terrible frame of mind that he takes out his penknife and stabs himself 36 times until he falls into the water and drowns. As strange as this may sound, the most logical theory might be that Luna suffered a breakdown which prompted him to do some wildly illogical things before he decided to take his own life. This is the only theory which explains many of the oddities in this case, but I have my doubts this is what really happened. The other explanation presented for why Luna would have stabbed himself is that he attempted to stage his own kidnapping and a violent attack against himself, but wound up going too far and ending his own life. As absurd as that sounds, this did follow what appeared to be one of the worst days of Luna's professional life, and his job was hanging by a thread. So if you wanted to do something to generate sympathy from your superiors, this would be an ideal time. But if he was trying to orchestrate a phony kidnapping, why not just go straight to Pennsylvania? Why spend a couple of hours driving northeast through Delaware before turning west again and winding up at that spot? And even if you're willing to inflict a couple stab wounds upon yourself in order to garner sympathy, inflicting 36 stab wounds sounds like major overkill. Let's also not forget that Luna's scrotum was slashed. I don't care who you are, you would have to be in a pretty bad state of mind in order to do something like that to yourself. When you couple in the fact that Luna supposedly had wounds at a spot on his back where it would have been very difficult to stab oneself, then I just cannot believe that all those wounds were self-inflicted. So we have a major difference in opinion between the Lancaster County Coroner's Office, who have always been adamant that Luna was murdered, and the FBI, who pushed forward the suicide theory. I ordinarily wouldn't have a reason for the FBI to orchestrate a cover-up in a case like this, but I cannot overlook the fact that within the past year, Luna had prosecuted not 1, but 2 cases involving the FBI where things went horribly wrong, and one of these cases was taking place at the exact time Luna wound up dead. Of course, there's the aforementioned bank robbery trial where the $38,000 went missing. Even though Luna had to help escort the bags of money to the courthouse evidence vault at the end of each day, the money itself was the FBI's responsibility. If Luna stole the money, then it's unlikely that he did it alone, and at least one person from the Bureau would have had to be involved. So if Luna and someone from the FBI had worked in cahoots together, could he have been murdered to prevent him from taking the polygraph test about the missing money? If he failed the test, perhaps Luna would have talked and given up whoever else was involved in the theft. The other potential theory involving the FBI might be connected to the recent revelation in the drug conspiracy trial that the star witness, Warren Grace, was a paid confidential informant, and the FBI agent in charge, Stephen Skinner, had essentially been giving Grace free rein to do whatever he wanted on his watch. In itself, the business with Grace probably wouldn't have been that big a deal, but this was taking place during a time period when there was a congressional investigation into the FBI's criminal mishandling of informants. The trial judge had openly chastised Agent Skinner for how he handled this whole situation, and it's safe to say that if the prosecution's plea agreement didn't go through and the trial continued, then the defense would have been allowed to open up a major can of worms about the FBI's informant program, and a lot of unflattering things could potentially be revealed in open court. It is pretty strange how no one wasted any time ensuring this plea deal went through on the morning of December 4th, even though Luna was missing. Luna had not even finished the plea agreement when he left his office the night before, and to me, it just seems really unusual that one attorney would finish another attorney's plea agreement in his absence and submit it to the court without even consulting with them first. Now, to be fair, the previous morning, Luna had shown up late to court because he had been at the hospital all night with his infant son, and the judge even fined him $25. So perhaps this is the main reason why no one found it that unusual when Luna didn't show up in court again the following day. But still, you'd think the U.S. Attorney's Office would have been inclined to ask for a postponement until they could figure out what was going on. Officially, no one involved in this case was informed about Luna's death until later that afternoon, but you have to wonder if any of those people knew that Luna was already dead at the time the plea agreement was submitted. It just seemed like closing the books on a drug conspiracy case took bigger priority over the whereabouts of a missing attorney. So it seems like some of the people who subscribe to the murder theory believe that Luna was killed by someone connected to the FBI, possibly in connection to either the missing $38,000 or the drug conspiracy case, and the Bureau went out of their way to cover the whole thing up and write off his death as a suicide. But if that's what really happened, just how would these events have played out? Because if someone wanted to kill Luna, why not just kill him? Why spend the entire night going on a tri-state road trip before murdering him in Lancaster County? In order to try and make some sense out of this, we have to start at the very beginning and break down Luna's movements that night. Here's what we do know. According to Luna's wife, he was working at home until he received a call on his cell phone at 11 p.m. and he told her he had to return to his office. The problem is that I have no idea who made this call or what they said to Luna to compel him to leave. I'm sure investigators were able to check phone records to find out this information, but they've never publicly released it. Now, since Luna drove out of the courthouse at 11:38 p.m. and left behind his cell phone and glasses, one of the most prominent theories is that Luna was abducted from the courthouse, or that he crossed paths with someone who forced him to leave and was in the car with Luna while he drove away. After all, if Luna needed his glasses for driving, why would he leave voluntarily without them? If Luna did all of his own driving that night, it must have been quite a challenge to travel hundreds of miles in the dark without his glasses on. Perhaps the person who phoned Luna on his cell phone at home lured him to the courthouse in order to abduct him. But if that's the case, what exactly was Luna doing for the next 6 hours? There is a major piece of the puzzle missing here. We know that Luna withdrew $200 from an ATM in Delaware over 1 hour later, but that money was eventually found scattered throughout his car, so if someone forced Luna to withdraw the cash, they didn't take it with them after they killed him. That's particularly weird when you consider that Luna's credit card was used 4 hours after he was found dead. If you're going to rob and kill someone, wouldn't you be more inclined to take his cash rather than his credit card, which has a much greater risk of being traced back to you? The authorities have never revealed any specific details about that credit card transaction, but since it occurred in King of Prussia, I'm still leaning towards the idea that Luna left it behind at the Sunoco gas station and someone unconnected to his death found it there and decided to use it. Another big oddity in this case is that Luna used his E-ZPass transponder at the first 3 toll interchanges he drove through, but then decided to start purchasing paper toll tickets. If Luna was under duress, and there was someone else in the vehicle with him, there are a number of potential explanations for this. Perhaps someone told Luna to stop using the E-ZPass because they thought that would make it more difficult to track their movements. Or Luna only drove the first part of the journey until someone else got behind the wheel and drove the rest of the way, and they decided to use paper tickets rather than the E-ZPass. But the issue here is that at least one employee recalled seeing Luna at the gas station in King of Prussia at 3:20 a.m. and did not believe he looked distressed at all. No one saw anybody else with Luna, but that person could have remained in his car the entire time, and the fact that Luna purchased 2 beverages, a soda and a bottled water, might be an indication that he had a passenger with him. However, I find it very strange that Luna apparently put 2 gasoline purchases on his credit card. Was he buying gas for another car which was accompanying him on his journey? It's so frustrating that there were security cameras at the 2 public places we know Luna stopped at, yet apparently neither of them recorded him or captured any useful information. Of course, I'm sure conspiracy theorists would say that the FBI went out of their way to ensure that anything incriminating captured on those cameras would never be seen. The biggest complication in this case, which would seem to go against the suicide theory, is the toll ticket which was handed in at the Reading Lancaster interchange at 4:04 a.m., which had a spot of blood on it. Since there didn't seem to be anything amiss with Luna at the gas station, then this would imply that something happened to him during the 44-minute window before he arrived at the toll interchange. Due to the pool of blood which was found on the rear floor, you could easily infer that someone else was driving Luna's car at this time while he was bleeding in the back seat. But here's the big unanswered question. Since a paper ticket was handed in at the interchange, you'd assume that this would involve interacting with an actual toll operator, so who did they see actually driving the car? Well, the authorities have never released any information about this. Since the FBI seemed convinced that Luna made the entire journey alone that night, then I guess this would mean that he was the one who handed in the toll ticket. But if Luna was alone, why was there a blood spot on the ticket? Remember, since the official cause of death was drowning, Luna was most definitely alive when he wound up in the creek at Lancaster County. So if Luna committed suicide, did he actually inflict a wound on himself before he reached the toll interchange and then drive for another hour or so while bleeding before he arrived at the creek? That really doesn't make much sense. Now, I've expressed my skepticism about the suicide theory, but the problem is that there are a number of holes in the murder theory as well. The biggest issue is the fact that Luna's own penknife was used as the murder weapon. If someone was planning on killing him, you'd think they would bring their own weapon rather than rely on a little knife that the victim owned and would require an extraordinary amount of effort to kill someone with. I guess the alternate explanation is that the perpetrator didn't originally plan on killing Luna, but some sort of altercation took place which led to them taking Luna's own knife and stabbing him with it. But if so, why did the murder take place on a dark remote road in the middle of the night in rural Pennsylvania? Well, I'm still inclined to believe that because of the poor visibility, the vehicle was driven into the creek by accident, either by Luna or somebody else, and that's what prompted the perpetrator to stab Luna at this particular location. But again, what were they even doing there to begin with? And if someone else was in the car with Luna, how did they leave the area? Much like the 2 separate purchases of gasoline on Luna's credit card, this lends credence to the idea of him being followed by a second vehicle. But even if there's no significance to Luna being in Lancaster County, is there a reason he was in Pennsylvania? Well, the main connection is the fact that Luna had traveled there several times in the preceding months, though it seems that the main purpose of his trips was to interview Warren Grace in Philadelphia to prepare for the drug conspiracy trial, and Philadelphia is about 2 hours away from Lancaster County. In fact, the most notable thing about Lancaster County is that it's Amish country, so needless to say, it's not known for being a haven for violent crime. I've said this before, but it's worth reiterating. Since a direct 90-minute drive to there from Baltimore only takes about 2 hours, why did Luna drive northeast through Delaware before heading west into Pennsylvania? I think the key to figuring this whole thing out is determining Luna's whereabouts during the time between when he withdrew the $200 in Newark at 12:57 a.m. and when he got on the New Jersey Turnpike at 2:37. That trip should have only taken about 45 minutes, so it seems likely that he took a detour and went somewhere else for an hour or so, and whatever that destination was, it may be the whole reason why Luna traveled to Delaware to begin with. Assuming that Luna wasn't abducted from the federal district court building or forced to leave there by someone else, whatever prompted him to drive all that way must have been pretty damn important. Remember, he still had a plea agreement which was due in court at 9:30 the following morning, which had still not been completed, so until we have more answers, there just doesn't seem to be any logical reason for him to make a trip like that. And even if he did have important business in Delaware, that still doesn't explain why he would head west into Pennsylvania instead of driving back to Baltimore. So this is definitely one of the toughest mysteries I've ever had to analyze. At the outset, I was so determined to completely dismiss the whole suicide theory, and I still don't believe it, but I can't come up with a murder scenario which makes much sense either. I think it all depends on how much you believe the Lancaster County Coroner's Office. They've always maintained that the evidence supports the conclusion that Luna was murdered, and that he would not have been able to inflict all of those 36 wounds by himself. But they're required to keep the autopsy report sealed from the public, so we are unable to judge for ourselves, and can only take their word for it. Given the controversy surrounding some of Luna's court cases, I can also see why the FBI might be inclined to write off Luna's death as a suicide and have a vested interest in his case not being solved. But it's also possible that all this business involving the drug conspiracy trial and the FBI's informant program is nothing more than a red herring. I can envision a scenario where someone from the FBI might want Luna dead, but I can't see one where they go to the trouble of brutally stabbing him 36 times. To me, if Luna was murdered, then it was a crime motivated by pure hatred, and it seems like whoever did it wanted to torture him and make him suffer before he died. Remember, this guy was a federal prosecutor who tried over 80 cases and put a lot of bad guys away, so he easily could have made some enemies who wanted revenge. Or maybe Luna really was leading a double life and was concealing some secrets which, for unknown reasons, compelled him to go on this mysterious quote-unquote midnight ride of his. The killer might be someone we don't even know about, who has yet to show up on the radar of potential suspects. But for all we know, this case might be nothing more than Luna suffering some sort of mental breakdown which caused him to do a number of inexplicable things before he wound up dead. If that's what happened, then I don't see how this case can be solved. It appears that a lot of the key pieces of this puzzle are being withheld from the public by law enforcement, but whether this is being done to protect the investigation or to orchestrate a cover-up, I do not know. If Luna really was murdered, then it's quite unfair to try to write off his death as a suicide and spread innuendo about his personal life, which may not even be true or have any significance. However, a $100,000 reward is still up for grabs, and even though the FBI doesn't really consider the case to be active, they have said they would reopen the investigation if they received any pertinent new information. So if you happen to have any information about the unsolved death of Jonathan Luna, please contact the appropriate authorities. But if you just have your own thoughts about what happened, feel free to leave me a comment or send me an email at robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. Another reminder that The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so if you have a moment, please visit patreon.com/thetrailwentcold to learn how you can support our podcast and become eligible for some pretty neat bonus rewards. We've released another new bonus episode this month for our donors in tiers 2 and 3, which covers the murder of Kent Heitholt and the wrongful conviction of Ryan Ferguson, so to learn more information, feel free to visit our Patreon page. I'd also like to take a moment to give a special shout out to our listeners who have recently signed up with us on Patreon, and they are Shelley G, Dorothy, Ray K, Ryan L, and Martin L. Thank you so much for your support. I also just wanted to give another shout out to my supporters at the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum and the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. Need to give my thanks to Miguel Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and Vince Nitro, who composes our eerie music score. If you haven't already, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, or leave us a rating or review on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play Music. So have yourself a good week, and join me next Wednesday for a brand new episode of The Trail Went Cold.